Yes, people, I can see the fire. Blessings sent to each and every one. And of course, we had 3 great tunes right there for you. We had Call on the Father by the one and only Beres Hammond. Straight to I Wayne with Living in Love. And just then, we had the original Morgan Heritage, okay? And that one was called Tell Me How Come. But right now, we're getting ready to speak to, once again, Richard Roe, okay? Definitely going to be blazing some energy, some fire. And of course, Richard, you there?
I certainly am.
Nice to speak to you once again. And of course, just so that if anybody has missed you before, let them know who you are and a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Yep. Okay. I'll fire away then, shall I?
Definitely.
Okay. Right. Well, my name is Richard Roe. I'm old, white, British. Worked in industry all my life. Now retired. Lived in this country. All my friends are white, British, etc., or used to be. That's changed quite a bit recently. And so, if you like, I'm a traditional person who's grown up over generations in the UK. I've done some charity work, and this exposed me to a lot of new people, new ideas, and modern challenges that increasingly impact on us all. It's been an amazing education for me. And when I worked at the Coventry Refugee Centre, the Belgrade Theatre wanted some stories from migrants, and they decided they asked if I would go along because I knew the guys, and it didn't really take off. So I then decided, for the first time in my entire life, to write a story myself, which I've never done. It's about to be published, and it's called Prisoners of Belief. It's taken me over 5 years. The interesting thing is, the more I look at it, the more I understand how we have the same attitude to many things in regard to ourselves, whereas many of the organisations that we grow up in the societies try to emphasise the differences.
Yeah.
If we're going to tackle modern or at least today's problems, we will have to learn to work together far more effectively than we have. I've put lots of things together. It's factually based, but the characters are all fictitious.
Yeah.
The objective is to try and bring things to people's attention which are fundamentally true and apply to all of us. They're not one-sided. The truth isn't owned by anybody. It should be available, but in order to derive it, you need to know what the facts are. So there's quite a lot of facts in the story, and some unpleasant scenes, but they are my attempt to reflect what actually happens. And if you look at the news, terrible things happen on a regular basis. So there's a lot of solidity behind it.
For real. And the first time we spoke, you kind of gave us an overview about the book. The second time we spoke, you spoke more in depth about different situations within the actual book itself. But I wanted to ask you, how did you decide on which case study you were kind of going to draw upon? Was it the most difficult ones, or how did you kind of figure out who you were going to talk about?
When I started, all I was trying to do was to write a story about migrant experiences in this country.
Yeah.
I had no idea. I didn't know much, and therefore it's taken me a long time to learn. In the process, the perspective became far wider, because you can't explain why the experiences of people in this country, say, who've just come in, they may be migrants, they may be asylum seekers, unless you explain the society that they're moving into. And the more you look at that, you realise that basically we are all tribes, and we move from one tribe to another. And it's not a question of superiority. And history is excellent at explaining why we are here at this point. It doesn't mean it comes up with solutions about what we should do going forward. And that's a completely different set of challenges. It's taken me a long time to sort of get round to that. But I'm firmly of that belief. And what I hope is that whoever you are, wherever you're from, if you read the story, there are things in there which challenge the beliefs that you have, and it's absolutely fine to reject them, to say anything I say or anything that's in the story, but you need to look at the basis of which you hold your own beliefs and to see how relevant those beliefs are to the life that you now lead, as opposed to just handing down, accepting what has been passed through the generations. The problem with that is you get social divides between communities, and they are passed through generations, which then cause a lot of damage to the present generation and future generations.
Definitely.
So
we just had a question in. Sure, no problem. We just had a question in from a listener. They're asking: is the book predominantly focused on or towards a white audience, or can anybody read this particular book?
Oh, absolutely anybody can read the story. And what people might think initially, well, it's about migrants coming in and having to fit into British society. I would say if you want to change society, you have to enlist the support of people who come in because they have different ideas, experiences, cultures, etc. But the people who need to change possibly the most are the people who are indigenous, i.e. ordinary, white, traditional British people. And they are the ones, in many ways, who will find it the most challenging. A migrant who comes here and wants to settle in this country understands when they come that there will be changes and that some of those will be very challenging for them. Many of the British are actually quite blind to their own vulnerability, and they have some very poor delusions about our independence and our freedom of action. There are loads of examples. I mean, Brexit is a small example, but the British have a big history, a long history, in some cases a successful history, but also there are many aspects which need to be discussed and challenged. I mean, a good example is many Africans don't know their own history. And one of the reasons is it's not been written down. If you then look at history in general, it's written by the victors. Well, the British have loads of information on some of their achievements. The problem is this is only half a story. Now, we collectively need to move forward and tackle today's problems and solve them together. But you can't turn the page because the story is only half written. The other half of the story, you can get to a situation which is absolutely true of the British. Half a story is so misleading. In some cases, it's a lie, and therefore you're not going to move forward until you actually understand what reality is. If you are full of myths and you base your beliefs purely on the past, it makes you very ill-equipped to deal with today's challenges. And the British are as guilty as that as anybody.
Wow.
I mean, it applies to all groups, all individuals in society, and it's really the way societies are formed and the cultures evolve, but they need to continue to evolve in order for us to work together on what are increasingly global problems.
Definitely.
And that there isn't a choice. The choice is either we stick with what we've got and hang on to it for as long as possible, in which case events will then sweep us aside and we will in the end be destroyed by it. Or alternatively, we try and understand the problems and we work with whatever resources, which means people outside of ourselves are required to solve these problems, because we have very similar problems and we increasingly need to understand what they are, and you need an open discussion for this to work. I mean, global warming is a very good example. The COVID and the lack of COVID vaccinations is a very good example. The way the world economic system is another example. I can go into any and all of these in a lot of detail. It depends, where where you want to touch. But at the end of the day, the planet is a single entity. But we humans divide things into compartments, and we do that so that our understanding is simpler. The problem is it means that, say, the vision of one person is not the same as the vision of somebody else. Reality is they're each looking at a part, and the part belongs to a whole. A very good example of that is that the British went all over the world and took resources from many countries for their industries. We learned where things were and how to use them, but we have very little understanding about how the planet operates. We have very little understanding about how species relate to each other, and in the process we're killing off loads and loads of species, and we have no idea of what the impact will be. And when creatures are extinct, we will then learn the interactions as they fall apart. Now that's not civilized, that's not educated, that's stupid. It's failing to learn from evidence that's actually before all of us. It's in the news almost every day. COP26 was an excellent talking platform. In terms of our mindset, we are a long, long way from solutions. And one of the reasons will be because many people, if they're advantaged by the present system, will be very reluctant to change. And the British absolutely in one of the main driving seats for that.
Definitely. And I'm always interested to know, how did you come up with the title of the actual book itself, Prisoners of Belief? How did that come to a title?
Well, the original title was a book of Reb. Okay. And Reb is R-E-B, and it's for R is rules, E is experiences, and B is beliefs. And basically, as I started to think more about it, to research it and put ideas together, it became clear that each society has its rules, and people within the society, they may not accept them, but in general, most people accept most rules in most societies. Now, the rules are based on, they're justified by your experiences. And they say, well, rubbish. The rules are justified beliefs. And you have to do this. A Christian will do this. A good Muslim will do that. And a good atheist or a good capitalist, whatever your belief system is, you justify it with some problem. Then come experiences, because experiences. If you take society, the rules are generally across the whole of that particular society. If you look at the belief system, it's generally spread, and there's normally consensus about the belief system that supports the rules. We have to do this because of what? It might be this is God's expectation. It might be because it's illegal and I will be thrown in jail if I don't. Whatever it is. The problem is with experiences is they're different for every individual person. So, for example, a brother and sister have different experiences. A mother and father do. My wife has different experiences from me, even if we live in the same house. Now, the problem then comes what happens if experiences are in conflict with the beliefs. So, the belief says, for example, the early Christians thought that the Earth was the centre of the universe. The problem is Galileo came up, got a telescope, and he looked at the planets revolving, and he worked out that actually we are revolving around the sun. But nobody believed it, and in fact, the church then took him to court for heresy, and he was confined to his house for the rest of his life. Now, that's where personal experiences conflict with beliefs. And that is true for every single one of us. When things don't work, there is a challenge. Often the belief system and the people who control the belief system go into denial, and they just say, no, that's not the case. If that doesn't work, they then isolate and try and destroy the source of the information. And there's loads of examples of that in the church, in governments, in any organisation. They operate on a very similar basis. If that doesn't work, they just change the belief system as if it had always been like that. And that's fundamentally not true. But what it demonstrates is that all organisations are collections of people, and people act in very similar ways in all organisations throughout the world. And that is very important to understand, because when you start to look at it that way, it gives you some sort of basis on which to assess your own personal beliefs.
Yeah.
And that's extremely important when you get different communities with different beliefs and they need to work together or fall out, and then there's conflict. And there's lots of examples of that, some of it going back hundreds of years, which is one of life's tragedies.
Definitely. And so when it comes to this particular book now, what would you like people to take away from the book?
I'd like them to read it and to think, to look at the situations that are in the story.
Yeah.
There's some horrible situations, and they are described in some cases in some detail. There's violence, there's racism, there's prejudice, there's ignorance, there's inequality. I mean, and these things exist, and they're illustrated between individuals.
Yeah.
But the facts behind them are all factually correct.
Okay.
As far as I can make them, as far as I'm aware, they're 100% correct. So it gives people challenges, which I then hope will give them that they will find valuable. And people will say, well, with horrible things in there, isn't it a horrible, depressing story? And I would say the opposite. If you feel fatalistic, that there's nothing that you can do, then that is very depressing. If you try and understand why today is like today is, and all the influences that have created today, I think you're far more in control, and you can make decisions. And I believe you feel more connected with your past and a clearer sense of self-identity. So, for example, it's my opinion that Africans in general don't know their own history very well.
Okay.
If they had a greater sense of awareness of history, I think they would feel more connected to their past and greater confidence in their current identity. And where in comparison with their family, their history, their traditions, and people from other countries.
Okay.
And I think that's extremely important. The same is true of the British. They only know half of their history, and what they need to balance it, they need a greater awareness of, for example, some of the bad things that we've done, why they were done, and do they have an impact on today?
Yeah.
It's very easy to get locked into history and to say, well, something happened 200 years ago, and that was very, very bad. Yes, but that may be true as a value judgment, but does it have an impact on today? And the problem is many of these things do have an impact, and those are the problems that we should be tackling.
Definitely.
It's absolutely vital. Because African history is also British history.
Yeah.
That's where we came from. It's part of our history. If we don't understand that, we don't understand the how we've got to where we are. We've only accepted a partial story.
Definitely, I agree.
And when you start to look at it in the broad, you then start to form the opinion that actually how similar we are all over the world. If you look at empires that have been created, British Empire is one, but if you look at any empire, whether it's Asian, African, South American, they all operated on very similar ways. They achieved some good things because they worked together and achieved, maybe it's in amazing buildings, maybe it's in the development of science and agriculture or whatever, but they also, along the way, did some pretty, in terms of the values we have today, some terrible things, and things, and that needs to be recognised in an open way, because what you end up with, if you don't, you end up with values today making judgments about the distant past, and if you only know half the history, then how good can your judgment be? And more important, what are your judgments going forward? You know, if you think the British Empire was fantastic and nobody should say anything against it, how does that relate to how the Brits are going to get on in the world? They're very ill-equipped to deal with other people. And the reality is, we are, whatever we think about our independence and our freedom of action and etc., we are very dependent on the rest of the world. An obvious example, you look at the financial city of London, it's one of the great financial centres of the world. It was built up on the British Empire and trade. And today, have billions of pounds, which has come from Russia, China, come from America, Europe, Africa as well. And that supports the financial city of London. You look at our industries. Our industries were built up, iron and steel, coal, cotton industry. They were built up because of the British Empire. Our industries today are just as dependent on imports of materials so we can keep our industries going. It's absolutely vital. The British have not been able to feed themselves for over 100 years. So in what way are we independent? And an interesting thing is, there are lots of war films. I mean, after the Second World War, there were like hundreds of them, and it shows either how stupid the Germans were or how wonderful we were and we could break in. One guy with machine gun, dozens of people, etc. This gives us that looks at history and gives us some sort of comfort and moral superior ground because we stood up against the Nazis. Reality is we were heavily dependent on the support from all the Commonwealth countries in order to survive. And in our army today, for example, is the smallest it's been in virtually 200 years. And if we think, you know, we're big and important, our army is tiny. The actual army we've got is 82,000. If you go to here's a list of countries which have armies much bigger than ours: Taiwan, Bangladesh, Italy, Syria, Israel, Afghanistan, Germany, South Sudan, Iraq, Morocco, Eritrea, France, Ukraine, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, Japan, Sri Lanka, Colombia, Turkey. I could go on. Indonesia, Brazil, Egypt. The point is, I mean, Egypt have got they've got 438,000 people in their army. We've got 82,000. India has got nearly 1.5 million. The United States have got 1.4 million. China has got over 2.1 million, 15 times bigger than us. How independent are we? In the old days, we'd send out a gunboat and we'd beat up whoever we need to, and we would impose our will. If people are under some sort of delusion that that's still possible, then they're very dangerous people because they'll make some very poor decisions.
For real, most definitely. You know what? I could talk to you all day about this, but people want to know, how can they get the book once again? And of course, we'll be speaking to you again. So how can the book come into somebody's hands?
Well, I will certainly announce it. It'll certainly be. I've actually evolved it. The problem is it continually evolves. And I wasn't very well recently. So actually, it was due to be in December. I put it back today to the 31st of January. And it will be almost certainly on Amazon. There will almost certainly be a website. There will be local publicity, certainly on radio and newspapers. And a lot of charities will also be aware. There's lots of things in there which are very important to me.
Yeah.
Because I feel that what we need is to establish the values in society by which we live.
Yeah.
And those values need to be consistent.
Definitely.
What we don't need is to delude ourselves about where we are and how good we are, and to think that we're superior. That there's no organisation you can join which makes you a more important as a human being.
Yeah.
But there are organisations you can join which actually destroy your humanity.
Definitely.
And that's why people need to look with an objective eye and be able to talk about lots of things, because we don't know, and we're still finding out. So this is not, this is not of quaint interest. To my mind, this is extremely important to the way our society challenges the problems that we have, and if we fail to do that, our societies, as we know them, will not continue to exist. I think it is actually that serious.
Definitely. You know what, Richard? I want to thank you again for coming on, talking to us about your journey, your great book, and of course we'll have you on again. I appreciate your time. And is there any final words you want to say to the listeners out there before we go?
Well, there are lots of specific things that I would like to go into detail with. I mean, for example, just to touch it for 20 seconds, I am against the TV adverts you see on television saying if you pay £2 or £3 a month, you can save somebody's life with simple medicines and food and clean water. I'm not saying they don't need it, and I'm not saying we shouldn't provide it. What I am saying is, by making those donations, the British, fool themselves that they're doing what they can.
Yeah.
The reality is that we as a Western capitalist society are massively underpaying people for the resources that we need for us to survive. If we paid them a proper amount, the UN have calculated that all of the charity donations from governments and organisations and individuals is swamped 10 times over by the underpayment for the resources that we currently live on in the West. Now, that is a massive injustice, and the problem is if we then just pay our £2 a month and we say, oh, well, I've done my bit, what we will then do is create the next generation who will be in the same position. And that, I think, is not morally correct.
Definitely.
I think it's just wrong.
Definitely. I agree 100%. And I want
there are many other things. I'd like to go into detail about the myths that the British have, that they're independent. I'd like to go into detail about how the world economy is run by the West for the benefit of the West.
Yeah.
The impact of religion, which is absolutely massive.
Yeah.
And lots of other subjects.
Definitely.
Maybe select a subject and talk about that one subject.
Definitely, I think.
Or maybe one or two.
Definitely, I think we've got so many different topics to discuss for the future, so I'm looking forward to that. And of course, I appreciate again your time and you coming on talking to us so openly and honestly. It's always appreciated.
No, that's a pleasure. I'm delighted, and I talk to people and they educate me, and that's if you ask the questions, you find out lots.
Yeah.
And that's really you got to ask with openness, ask with humility, and you've got to listen.
Definitely.
And I think that's true of all of us.
For real, definitely, I agree with that. And on that note, we can end here today. And like I say, we'll definitely keep talking to you and keep people up to date.
Thank you very much indeed.
Anytime. Thank you. Have a good rest of the evening.
And you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Yes, people, please do go out there and support, okay? It's going to be a great book. It's going to be a great, definitely a great insight for lots of different people. That's Richard Roe, okay? It's called Prisoners of Belief. Make sure you go and check it out. Go see what he's been getting up to, what it's about. But right now, we're taking you to some more tunes, some more vibes. Big shout out to everybody who's been sending lots of messages. Here we go.
Oh guys, yeah, it's I Phenom, I'm representing for world best selectress, DJKat the Katalyst. Oh guys. Life too short, we have to cherish it. The race have to run, we have to finish it. But before me leave off of this pilgrimage, I have to tell you, say me love you.